The record. Done. Thank you for joining me, Kristen. We were talking in private message after a few of the posts, and you were noticing that a lot of the older physios in my group and a lot of the business owners are commenting, and I was reflecting back to you that a lot of the younger physios private message, and there's a weird dynamic there. So what we read tends to be more boomer, and what we get in private message is like the younger physio saying that's not fair. So we thought we would come on and discuss how we perceive both sides, even though we're neither boomer or Gen Z. So how long have you been in your profession, and tell us where you are in your career?
So I have been a physio this is my 5th year out. So I studied at the University of Newcastle. I graduated 2019 December, and then my first year of practice was 2020, which you can imagine was not super fun to have as a first year experience. That was pretty a bit random. There's a podcast that I did with somebody else that talks about my experience, my first year of physio. Sidebar. But yes, I worked in kind of a mixture of things in my first year out. So I did private practice, I did neuro physio, I did community physio. I did too many things. I guess it was a lot of exposure. I did aged care. And then after that, I went into solely private practice, which is what I wanted to do from the very beginning. Just COVID kind of made that a little bit random. So I've been in private practice solidly for 4 years, and then I did 6 months in my new graduate year of like pretty much full-time private practice. So would you say 4.5 years? I have 5 years experience in physio and 4.5 years in private practice.
Yeah, right. And are you comfortable sharing your age range?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I've just turned 30. I turned 30 in January. So I'm not actually Generation Z, but as we were saying before, I am closer to Gen Z. Like apparently the cutoff is 96, and I was born in 94. Than I am to being Gen X. So.
And we were saying that neither of us are actually in either of the camps we were laughing at, because I'm 87, which makes me 37 this year. What's that title of generation?
Millennial. You're a straight up. You're like middle of millennial. What you are? Yeah. Like full on millennial.
So what are we seeing? Because in our conversation, we're like, what I thought we did well was like, I see what the business owners are saying. Here's what we think they're trying to say. Here's what's hard about their position. Here's what doesn't come across well about their position. And then we were doing the same. Like, I see what the younger physios are saying. Like, there's no point in working harder because that doesn't solve the problem. Like, we're not going to be able to buy a property like you guys were allowed to buy a property. Do you want to start at either end of that spectrum?
Yeah, I guess the thing that prompted me coming to talk to you in the first place was a particular thread where there was a few business owners that kind of came on and said, you know, I've worked as a physio, it's been 20 years, 25 years, and I've been able to do all of these things. I have multiple properties, I've got this, I've got that. And like, I like to assume the best of people. So I would assume that, you know, maybe these people are coming on to say this, to say like, look, don't give up. I've been doing this for 25 years and I've been able to do all of these things. Like, you just got to stick it out and you might be able to have what I've got. So we're going to assume that's the angle that they're taking by saying these things, right? From the perspective of someone who is younger, even though I'm not that young, I'm not old, but I'm not 21, I'm not that fresh. It's I guess there's some like it could be helpful in some aspects to say, okay, yeah, maybe I just have to bide my time. But a lot of it kind of makes you feel like, oh, wow, I don't know if they actually really get our economic position and how different that is to the economic position of 20 to 25 years ago. I can go into my little stats, my little numbers, if that's helpful. You know,
I thought that was really cool, because you shared with me like some actual data around, I think it was income and house price, and that we need to acknowledge that it is so much harder for new grads today.
Yeah, so the data that I've got, and like, look, I'm just going to put a little disclaimer out there that I was not a physio in 2004. So if anybody wants to come on and say you are wrong, then by all means do that. But this is just what I found from the Australian Bureau of Statistics. So So this isn't physiotherapy specifically. This was allied health. So I looked up the year 2004 because everyone seemed to say they had about 20 years of experience. So in 2004, I took Sydney as the as kind of like the reference point, right? Because Sydney, I mean, you could say that that's biased and it suits my argument best because that's where the house prices are most expensive, but it's all relative, right? It's all relative. So in 2004, the average new graduate wage for an allied health professional was $39,000. And the average house price, I think it was something around, I've got it written down here, 314,000. So that, like 39,000 as a percentage of 314,000 is around 12%, right? So you were earning 12% of the average house price in Sydney. For a new graduate to have the same kind of economic power today, they in Sydney specifically would have to be earning 136K, I think. Let me check my numbers. Yep, $136,000 because the average house price or median house price is 1.12 million. That's in Sydney, right? Now, like obviously Sydney, I think is probably the worst city for house prices versus wages because just so for reference, the average wage, new graduate wage today is $70,000. So on average, people in Sydney specifically are like about half, they're earning about, how they have about half the economic power that the physios, new grad physios would have had in 2004. So although I see where people are coming from and coming on and saying, look, you know, I've been a physio for 20 years and I've worked hard and my hard work has paid off and now I've got these things. It's just not going to be the same, like realistically for the next generation. It kind of can't be. That's that.
Yeah. Do you think that brings in a sense of kind of nihilism, like it feels like it doesn't matter how hard I work, like whether I see 40 patients or 60 patients and I go on to earn that extra $20,000 or $30,000, that almost doesn't actually get me that much closer. So why is it like, why would I? Or what I'm seeing is just more flexibility in younger physios. They're more happy to start part-time and stay part-time. They seem happier to do two jobs and might even be completely different industries or like one community, one private. And they do seem more geared towards, no, like I want my free time. I want a bit more balance. And I wonder if that comes from, look, an extra $20,000 actually after tax is not going to get me that closer to this thing, even if that's what you want. I don't even think it's a good goal at the moment to own property, separate argument. But do you think that contributes to some sense of nihilism?
I would say so. I think nihilism is probably the worst case scenario, right? Where you go, oh, well, why would I even try? I don't know if I know many people who are actually like that. I think physio and allied health, as a general rule, you can earn enough to live a good life, right? But you're not probably going to be earning, especially if you're an employee in a business, you're probably not going to be making bank and, you know, I don't know, taking heaps of holidays and driving fancy cars or whatever. And I don't think that's very many people's goal anyway. I think you can live a good life. I think the nihilism maybe comes from people, I don't know. I don't know many nihilistic physios, like genuinely nihilistic, but that might be different for you. You might have like spoken to people who have had that experience. If you were earning any less, so kind of those 40 to 60K jobs, which are not that's not generally our profession, then I can see you would probably be pretty nihilistic. But I think even for me, I think, yes, it's kind of that middle ground where you're kind of like, well, if I do work hard and I earn an extra 20 to 30K, right? I am not going to be in a position where I'm going to be making, like my life's going to be that different. Maybe I can go on an extra holiday. You know, tax is exponential too. So like the amount you get taxed on 60K versus 70K versus 80K, you're not making that much more every time. And so you look at what you're taxed and you think, well, if I'm earning an extra 20K, I'm getting taxed 30% of that $20,000 plus my HECS debt is taken out of that. Not that much extra money. Maybe it's an extra holiday. Is that something that I want to do? If it is, then great. That's my goal and I'll work for that. If it's not, then am I happy to just kind of work part-time, chill out, have good relationships with people because I've got more time, invest more in my family, invest more in my hobbies. It prioritize my mental health, my sleep. And that's kind of where I think people go more towards, rather than that full on nihilism where it's kind of like, oh, I'm just not going to try.
Yeah. I like what you say. It really comes down to, it's obvious, but the goals the person has. I
Yeah,
feel like
totally.
if you really want a property, it can be done, but it's that decision of like, am I going to work an extra day a week, or am I going to see that extra 15 clients?
Yeah, yeah.
Mm,
Property. I think property might be a little bit of a different one, because that extra $10,000 per year, I don't know where. Look, I have a property. Total disclaimer: I have a house. I'm 30. I
mhm.
was lucky enough to, like, even in the last 5 years, because I did watch the interview that you did with Gayu that came out a couple of days ago, and
Yeah.
kind of the numbers that she was stating around. Okay, I paid 300, our rent started at 390. I'm pretty sure she said I was able to bank $700 per week of my pay. And so I went, obviously, because I'm a bit of a math person, I was like, okay, let's go and do the maths on that. So that, I was in a similar situation. So when I first came out of uni and during university, I think my rent started when I was renting at about $350 a week. And then when we left, so we finished renting in 2022, we bought our house in 2022. The house we were renting was $450 per week. We were really lucky. Like, we had a really good landlord. He could have put out the price on our rental up heaps more than he did. But so I was lucky in the sense that I missed out on that really horrible, like, the rental crisis that's happening at the moment. But if you look at the average rental price now, in Sydney it's 680, in Brisbane it's 674, in Newcastle, where I live, it's 640, and in Melbourne it's 580. So even if you're living in a share house, right, you are still going to be paying a fair chunk of your pay each week in rent. And so then I looked at that kind of, okay, well, could a new graduate feasibly save $700 of their pay per week today, right? Not in 2019 or 2020. If you look at, so average new grad wage, 70,000 with a HECS debt of about 30K, you'll be taking home after tax per week just over $1,000. So 1,024, I think it came out at. So that leaves you $324 per week if you're going to bank $700 every single week. If you're living in a share house and the rent is $680 and there's three of you, you're still what? $220, $230-ish per week. And that's going to leave you about $100 for everything else. So it's just different now, right? Like, so it's really good to hear about people like Gayu who did it and she saved, and she's obviously, like, you know, was quite frugal with her money. She had goals. She did a really good job. I probably did a similar thing, right? And also, I have a partner. I'm married. You're doing it with two people. It makes it much easier. But if we had to, I talk to my husband about it all the time. If we had to do it again today, like, it would be much, much harder to be able to bank the money that we did 5 years ago now, even though I'm earning more money.
Yeah, the last 2 years has significantly shifted. Like, even just the last 2 years since COVID. So that it's worth factoring in, isn't it? Yeah, that's interesting. I've seen. I think if property is the goal, which we can talk about this later. I just don't think having a property is a great goal in general. And so sometimes I wonder, like, for my younger physios, I'm talking to them a lot about their goals, and I'll really get into the why. Like, why is it you want a property? Is that just because that's what our parents did? Is that what you think society says is a measure of success for you? And I find that really interesting as a starting point. But one of my younger physios at our retreat presented a bit of a finance session, and he was sharing how you can, as allied health, you can get a 90% loan, so you only need a 10% deposit.
Well, that's what we actually got a 95% loan.
Great, yeah. So
Yeah.
he was saying then the real goal is, like, if you want a property, you need to probably save between $50,000 and $60,000, and that would get you in the market in regional Perth. Or so
Yeah.
it was really interesting because they were going through for our younger guys, is it possible? And the answer might be yes, but probably not in New South Wales or Vic, and maybe even not Queensland anymore. And then it was still the challenge of, how long might it take me to save $50,000 or $60,000? Because that could be 5 or 10 years now for this cohort. What do you think?
I just like going back to the point of like, why would you want to own a property in the first place? Like, and that not being a very, a good, whether that's a realistic goal or like just challenging people around that. I think like even for myself, like why did I want to own a property? It's for security, right? Like, so nobody can tell me where I can and can't live. It's for, so I can feel like like my house is my house. Like there's not a lot of renters' rights in, I don't know if New South Wales is different. Actually, Victoria is much better than New South Wales. But in New South Wales, you have to, if you want a pet, you have to like fight tooth and nail to even have a pet. If you want to put a nail in a wall to hang a photo of you and your kids, you've really got to be like, hey, like I just want to like put this nail in the wall. Can I please do that? You want to have a kid and paint the nursery? Oh, okay, no, you can't paint the nursery. It's a rental. Just stuff like that, right? So if you're the goal for me was like, well, if I ever want a family, like I'd like a place that we could have that's ours rather than me having to go to somebody else all the time and say, can I do this and can I do that? And I think that's, I don't know. I don't think that that's too much to ask. It's not like I want I'm sitting in my house right now. I don't know if you can see my green kitchen bench over there. Like I don't live in a fancy house. Like I painted the walls white so they look nice. But I don't want anything big or fancy or super nice. I more just wanted something that I could feel secure in, that a rental inspector isn't going to walk through and judge my messy laundry, or I can hang a TV on the wall if I want to, rather than having to have everything on stands. Stuff like, I don't know. You could, maybe that's superficial. I don't really know. Maybe some people will be like, okay, you don't need that. But I personally, like that, the previous generation did have that and had that kind of security of housing. And I don't think that housing insecurity should be the norm. Should be, you just have to live in a rental if you want to live near where you work, and you can just be kicked out at any time, especially as someone who has, like, you've tried, you've done the hard yards, like you did what everyone told you should do. You did well in school, you went into physio, you did your degree, you did well, you got a job, you're working hard, and now, you still can't have a house of your own. Time to get evicted. Also, you can't have a dog. Do you know what I mean?
So there's a difference between, some people might want it for security, like they want those elements of, I want to be able to do what I want to do. I don't want to move every 2 or 3 years, and usually kids is part of that equation. Some people want a property for investment, and they're they're probably some of my younger team who's buying in Perth with minimal savings compared to what you need in Sydney and Melbourne. And then others are like, not a huge goal for me. I might invest in something else like shares, and I'll rent where I want, but the rent costs are so high. So that's interesting.
I guess we're talking about the two different mentalities here. One is making money, and one is just living a comfortable life and living a life that feels secure. And I don't think that the secure life or feeling like a feeling of security should be out of reach for university trained professionals. Like, basically, look, when we bought our house, like, we saved really hard, obviously. Like, we saved, I think, $70,000. We still paid stamp duty because we just had unlucky timing. So we had to pay, even though we were first home buyers, we had to pay a decent amount of stamp duty. I've lost my train of thought. That's so great that this is going to go on YouTube when I've lost my train of thought. Can we sidebar and go back to that? Because I was thinking,
so just bringing it back to when some of the owners jump on the group and say, like, like, I worked every Saturday, I saw 60 patients a week, I saved every dollar, I lived an hour away, like Guyu's story. All of my physios, because I posted that link into my Slack before I posted it live, and they're like, how did she get that rent? And I'm like, well, you guys all live within 15 minutes of the clinic. She was equivalent to like living in Penrith to come to our clinics in Rozelle. But the feeling is, when the older crew jump on and say that, it feels almost like ignoring some of this stuff that you're
Yeah.
saying. And that's the feeling I was receiving in private messages from the grads. They're like, I just don't think they understand. Like, it just almost feels like being invalidated, I guess. It's like, you're not hearing us. Like, for you to come on and say, you can do it, just work harder, just feels like complete ignoring of all the data you've just said.
That's right. And it's like, if you just take it back to that simple metric of I would have to earn double what I currently earn as I'm not a new grad, but if I was on $70,000, I would have to earn close to $140,000 to have the same economic power that you had as a new grad on that $39,000 versus the house prices. Like, if you bring it back to just that simple metric, it's like that. I hope that helps people to understand that it is a little bit more difficult to get ahead now. Not that it's impossible. Not that I'm sitting here and being like, oh, everyone should just give up because it's so hard. Like, you can get there. It's just a little bit harder. And because it's that bit harder, and we've got this kind of like these people coming down from the top being like, well, you're just not working hard enough, and you just have to work harder, and you just have to do this. It's like, no, I am. Like, I work full time. I don't just work full time too. I know most people I know that are of my age and younger have a side hustle. So I'm a musician on the weekends, and I work as a physio during the Monday to Friday. Like, I'm not sitting on my ass. I'm not the entitled Gen Z physio that's sitting here going like, well, why don't you just give me more money? I just expect more. I don't want to work, and I just expect to be paid heaps of money. Like, most of us genuinely do try to earn money, make money, but it just feels like it doesn't go as far. And I think my personal psyche switches from like, I can do this, like, we're making some progress, and then you get hit with a bunch of like the mortgage, and then you see the interest on that, and you're like, oh my God, I just paid $4,000 to pay off $300 from my mortgage this month. And then there's car payments, and then there's this and there's that, and you worked really hard in the month, and you thought you were quite frugal, and I've got this thing that basically adds up how much I've earned versus how much I've spent, and maybe you're only $1,000 in the green, which is not bad, but it's not that much for a whole month. And you're like, bloody hell. Well, you know what? Maybe I will just go on a holiday, because that's more affordable than a house anyway.
So the reality is, you can get ahead, but to get ahead, you may not be able to buy where you want to live. You may have to share a home much, 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 much further away than, say, previous generations didn't have to share a home and could live closer. You also have a giant HECS debt. So the reality is, it just is infinitely harder from multiple angles.
And it takes longer too. And I think having that discipline for a long period of time, like say it's going to take you 7 years to save your deposit, that's just like having that grind mentality for 7 years, and then watching the house prices continue to go up and up and up. And you just like, it's kind of hard to ignore that, to just like, you know, go head down, butt up, focus on the goal, when like all of these external factors that you have no control over are basically just kind of piling on top of you. HECS debt last year didn't help that either. The fact that another little side tangent, if anybody watches this and wants to know and thinks, oh, you know, maybe it is a bit harder for this generation, how can I help these guys? There is currently a petition to change the way the HECS debt works, not to get rid of it, obviously, but to change how it's indexed. So currently it's indexed with inflation, and they want to change it to index it with how much wages have gone up over the previous year, which just makes sense, right?
Yeah.
And the other thing is to change when your HECS debt comes off the actual debt. So currently we all pay. Do you have a HECS debt, if you don't mind me asking? No.
No, I left without one.
Oh, great. We all pay our HECS debt weekly or fortnightly, whatever, out of our pay, and that's held by the ATO. I assume they probably invest that so they can get interest on that money. Then on the 1st of June, it's indexed, right? On the 30th of June, we pay it off. So they put interest on before they take off what you've paid. So basically what that's meant for me is that over the past 5 years that I've been paying off my HECS has gone up because it indexed it. and then they take off what I've paid, and then they index it again, and then they take off what I've paid. So I finished uni with a $57,000 HECS debt, and now I owe $60,000, which is very depressing. So even just those external factors where you're like, I'm trying, but then those things happen, you're like, oh my gosh, like it's genuinely, this is so frustrating. Why have I tried so hard?
Is it about, because I have to like approve the pay runs. Is it about like sometimes 150 to 250 a week to pay off
Oh
HECS?
yeah,
Is that right?
It's about that. Yeah.
It's wild. Like I see, because like you see that when you're doing a pay slip, you see the gross amount. You're like, that's pretty good. Like, well done. And then it's like tax, HECS, super's on top. But once you take out tax and HECS and you see the net, it's like, whoa, that's
And
difficult.
imagine, say it's $250 a week. Imagine having an extra $250 a week. Like that's a decent little chunk, right? That's thousands of dollars a year that you're putting towards your HECS debt. And then that means nothing because they've indexed it. You know, you've gotten nowhere with that $4,000, $5,000 that you've given to the ATO. So anyway, I don't want to sound like a whinger. Like it sounds like I'm whinging, but just basically the economic climate is difficult for young people, and that's why they get a little bit frustrated when they hear things like, well, you just have to work harder, because it's like, well, there's actually these other things that are outside of our control that make it difficult.
I mean, I have 4 jobs. So, and I think if I took one of the 2 bigger ones away, like the mentoring I do or running iMove, I don't think I would be able to support the family right now. So it's super interesting. So we were like, okay, this is true. And then what do you feel we do as the owners in the group, as mid-career physios, and even as new grads? What do you feel like are some actual achievable, is there anything achievable solutions wise that's not the system's broken? Because everything you're saying is true. I don't see any changes to those things anytime soon, right? Like people are going to keep leaving with big HECS debt. Property's not going to slow down. And now they're even talking about like interest rates potentially not curbing and lots of things. And in our world, we're probably not going to change that stuff. So besides from systemic changes, what do you think are some solutions or at least hopeful points for our profession?
Yeah, cool. So obviously we've spoken about all the macro stuff, right? Like we have no control over that. And that's not specific to physio. That's every single person, young person working today is experiencing the same kind of, issues with finance and things like that. Things that we can do as a physio profession. Well, I think we spoke about one of the main things that is helpful is having open communication between younger physios and older clinic owners, where so we can at least understand each other's perspectives and have sympathy towards one another, right? And not be on the attack. So young people not being like, oh, stupid clinic owner probably has 7 Ferraris in his garage and 4 houses and I hate that guy. And then the older clinicians not being like, oh, so lazy, they just don't want to work. Like open communication and understanding one another is really helpful, right? Because I, shout out, have a great boss who, he's definitely not driving 7 Ferraris, that's for sure. But like just the fact that he's kind and empathetic towards this kind of stuff. He can't just give me an extra 20 grand a year. That's not possible for him. But at least he's like, yeah, I understand that it's difficult. It's like, oh, that's nice, not a jerk. So that's just a thing for all spheres of life, right? Being open and kind and communicating well. That's the, I guess, part of the social side of things. And then the other thing is, well, making more money, I guess. Like, how do we, realistically, the economic climate's not going to get any better. How do we help young people make more money? You can't obviously just pay people more money. The clinics have to be profitable. You can't just be running at a loss or at basically no profit, no loss. It's not a charitable organization. It's there to make money. And I think we spoke about a few different ways that young people can kind of branch out to bring in more income other than side hustles, obviously. They're great in a way, and then they're also kind of difficult in a way because split your brain into multiple areas, which is distracting from the one thing you're trying to work on. I think we mentioned in terms of making more money, obviously you've spoken about this so much in the group, but putting prices up, I'll let you comment on that more than me, right? Like, do you feel like as a whole the physio profession needs to put their prices up? Or do you think we charge enough?
Well, it's interesting because when I did some of those figures, hey, like if you see 45 and you charged 100 and you worked 47 weeks of the year and you got 40% of your rev, you would be able to earn over 100K, and then you could have your own perspective on if 100K is even good.
Mm-hmm.
But there were a few comments from other business owners and coaches, and they're like, why is your average $100? And I'm like, like, I think we have a pretty premium brand in Sydney. Like, we have the latest gear, we have we treat younger, active runners.
Yeah.
And it was interesting that they're like, you're probably charging $30 or $50 under for your follow-up. So that was even surprising for me to get that kick up the bum.
Yeah.
And even I have a bit of a I know in Panania, which is a southwest suburb of Sydney where I grew up, the physio clinic 3 doors down, which is a massive franchise physio, charges like 85 for a follow-up, and I'm being told 100 is not enough and I should go to 150. Like, that even makes me squeamish as a business owner. And then that is the calls from everyone is just put your prices up. But there's a lot of barriers to that. If I feel uncomfortable, I can't imagine how a new grad feels saying it's $150 today. That's going to take a lot of value proposition, a lot of training, and a lot of confidence. Which,
Totally.
what do you think? What do you think about that? I don't think it's just like put your prices up.
No, I get the ick from. I guess maybe you get used to it. Like where I work is fairly like there's different tiers of pricing where I work.
Yeah.
So you know the director charges more than the us.
Yeah.
For about 5 years experience. But our clinic does a price rise. I think I don't know if it's every 12 months or 6 months with like kind of inflationary, like it just goes up. And every time it does go up, I kind of go, oh my Lord, it was already kind of expensive and now it's even more expensive. So I don't know if that's just it's an innate thing for me to feel uncomfortable about that. But I feel like there is a ceiling on prices, right? Like if I was like, yeah, it's $400 for follow-up, no one is going to come and see me. That is way too much money. So yes, I guess you can raise prices to an extent, but you have to know your demographic and you have to be comfortable with that. Otherwise, I think it'll affect how you rebook, because if you're not comfortable with what you're charging, then you're less likely to want to rebook people at a closer date, because you're kind of like, oh my gosh, I'm already kind of expensive. Like, I don't want you to have to come back in 3 days because I charge $150 and I'm uncomfortable about that, if that makes sense, which is almost like it's going to end up making you less money anyway. Because you're not seeing someone as often. I don't know. That's hypothetical, isn't it? So raising prices is an option, bit to an extent. I guess it depends on the clinic. And then the other things we talked about were education and things like that, having courses, having value added in your clinic in ways that is more passive. I think that was incorrect grammar. Like creating education online kind of things that people can purchase that bolster the clinic's income. So if that becomes something that's consistent, then yeah, we can put everyone's pay up a little bit because we're bringing in $50,000 a year just from these online courses that we sell, or these face-to-face courses that we do. I think that's smart. That's quite smart. It's just a lot of time effort, right? Like if you're already seeing 70 patients a week or even 50 to 60 patients a week, and then someone's like, you got to create an online course on top of that. So it's like, all right, like, cool. I can see that there'll be benefit in that, but it would take you, I feel like it would take a long time to do that to a point where you were happy with what you were putting out rather than just throwing something together and putting it online and selling it.
Yeah, it's super interesting because we were big advocates of, firstly, get really consistent in that 50 to 60 range. Consistency looks like you've probably maintained that for 6 or 12 months. And the other check marker for us was if you were to go away on holidays, you would come back to pretty much a full list. That for us was a marker of, you know, that you're going to be earning that same amount for the other 47 weeks you're here. Mm-hmm. And generally, like there are some just unicorn clinics where it doesn't matter what you do, you're just full all the time. But I mean, generally for us in Sydney, that would be like a second or third year practitioner that gets to that point.
Yeah.
And so then we would say, once you're doing that, come down to a 4-day work week. And then if you were interested, the development of other things. But our physios are learning now that that's a whole nother business. Like you
Yeah,
need to
totally.
see, you got to see an accountant, you need an ABN, you need a zero file, you need to run a P&L and a bank account, and you have to pay taxes on that. And anyone can build a course, but building a business is different because selling a course is hard. And
Yeah.
we can all post on Instagram because we all know how to do that, but actually gaining a following who want, like, that is harder than being a physio, I think, as in the time to produce the course is shorter, but to actually be successful in that can take another 5 to 10 years. And some of our guys are like, oh, this isn't just like building the course, it's a business. And
And it's a completely different
it's a lot of
skill set.
pressure. That's a lot of pressure. Yeah. So we're seeing that. I guess my only thing, I don't think there's a lot of great solutions to this. My thing is I still do this a lot, like probably once a month. I'm asked to go into clinics and explain the where does the money go exercise. Like we have that in our induction of like this, just I think the more both parties understand, it allows for that empathy that you were talking about of like,
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, where does 40% of the expenses go? And then if 40 to 50% goes to wages, and then what's left? And then I try to show, like, say a Paddy in our clinic, his average consult's around 120, 125 because he's got a bit of a niche with running. And he's seeing 50 to 55 clients on a 4.5-day week. And if you extrapolate those numbers out, you can earn between, say, 125 and 150. I'm feeling like that's about the ceiling for us. And then the question is that sustainable? Like, can we still have some of those things we want on, say, 125, 150? And I'm also holding space that there are not a lot of clinics like that. There's not a lot of clinics that even have a pathway to those numbers.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's tricky, hey, and especially like this doesn't really affect your new graduates, which is who we're talking about, right? We're talking about really early career physios who are feeling quite nihilistic. I guess it helps to know that there is a pathway forward, but it means it's quite tricky in the first 1 to 2 years, especially if you're not in a clinic that's supportive
100%.
and like educating you well and going, this is how you get busy and this is how you make money, and we're going to pay you for like well for the effort that you're putting in. I mean, I think that's where the burnout comes from, and that nihilism is kind of like, well, I don't really see a way forward here.
The first 3 years are, if you're on 65 to 80 in your first 3 years, that's almost all of this stuff's off the table, I would say, like saving and even thinking about property. And then we'll have to do a part 2 because I actually have a meeting now. I've got people in the waiting room. Should just let them in and bring them in on the chat.
Ask what I think.
The other thought. So I'd love to do a part 2 and share the some of the business owner side and some of those numbers. In your first 3 years, when you're, say, seeing 20, 30, 40 clients, the other thing that happens is you're often receiving 70 to 80% of the revenue you're generating. And then what I've found is it creates this tension between owners and grads, because grads have worked so damn hard for 3 years and they're still on this base salary. And business owners' perspective is you're only just breaking even now. Now's where it gets hard, but you're exhausted. And this gap keeps getting bigger and bigger. So I'd love to discuss more of that on part 2.
Righto, let's a teaser trailer for part 2. That's what we're going to talk about.
All right. Thank you so much.
No worries. I'll talk to you soon.